And the FBI came to his house with their firearms threatening him.
Exactly. He was the only one that would actually read the juror's handbook, and he knew what his rights were as a federal grand juror and demanded those. They weren't going to allow that, and they had to
stay there. Back in 1 minute. We're into the third hour in 20 minutes. Bob Chapman's joining us. We're doing part one. This interview live right now with our guest, the producer and the director of the film A Noble Lie, available at Infowars.com. We were just talking about Hoppy Heidelberg with his Citizens Rulebook. He actually had one of these, same ones we sell, the Patriot one about jury nullification, all of it, the rights of a grand juror. And they got pretty upset about that. I think I talked to him years ago. From memory, I think he tried to hand these out, too, and that really made him upset. And they just wanted the cover-up to go ahead, but he's in the film. Continue, gentlemen. This is a 5-minute segment. We got a 12-minute segment coming up before you leave us, but continue breaking down A Noble Lie and the Hoppy Heidelberg point.
Well, you were talking about intimidation, and yes, Hoppy was intimidated by the FBI. They attempted to intimidate him. He wasn't going to have any of that. But we also interview Don Browning. He's a retired Oklahoma City police officer that worked at the K-9 unit and was there for search and rescue. He said that an FBI agent said that people that like him that ask questions often end up dead, and he said that it was the way it was presented to him. He thought it was a threat, And
of course, yeah. I mean, wow. I mean, they had their hitmen everywhere. Go ahead.
Yeah. And a lot of the people that we interview in the movie, they've stated that this is going to be the last interview they do. So, I mean, this is really the last chance that we, to really encapsulate this story into one cohesive package. We've got folks like, Jane Graham, where she said, this is it. She's not going to do another one.
Exactly. One other thing that they'll appreciate this film even more is that the gentleman that actually shot, he was our director of photography, he shot the interviews, had done the same thing on several anniversaries the last 4 or 5 years for Discovery Channel, for History Channel, for National Geographic. He knew firsthand what they, as they say, left on the cutting room floor. And when we approached him, he says, I want to do it right for you guys. He says, nothing is going to go on the cutting room floor if I can help it. And by gosh, if our editor kept at least 95% of the interviews on there. So people are going to see what Discovery, what National Geographic, and what History Channel refused to put on the networks. We are going to show it.
Yeah, that was our director of photography, Devin Winter, and he said that, those interview subjects said the same thing to them that they said to us. But this is the first time that it's all going to come out, because anything that contradicted the official story, with these mainstream media outlets obviously got cut.
Yeah, I've talked to Jane Graham, and in fact, since a lot of people are riding off in the sunset, you gave me, I already have a lot of their numbers, but we do need to get you guys back on. I forgot that point next week, and start having some of them on here and playing some clips just so the public realizes what we're talking about here. I mean, actually hear it from them. They've told all this to the mainstream media, and it never ends up getting out there because this isn't mainstream media. This is lying snake media that has brought our country to this point.
I see some of the hosts that, we look back on the archive footage, and we know who the hosts are. Of course, they've aged quite a bit since then. I see them at basketball games. I'll see them at a Walmart or 7-Eleven. They know who I am. They know who James is. We know who they are, and they just avoid us like the plague. They do not even want to talk about this. I mean, they were told to shut up.
Yeah, in the early hours of the bombing, all of the local news stations were telling the truth. And then after, federal boots hit the ground, the story started to change. The only station that really maintained any integrity for a few months was the local station Channel 4. But then the New York Times came in and bought them up and fired everybody that was contradicting the official story and basically silenced any dissent.
Because this was about the re-election of Bill Clinton and the rollout of the military and police against the citizens. And now here we are, 15, 16 years later, and they've overthrown Posse Comitatus. They're saying, we'll arrest you and throw away the key. Total tyranny. Drones are now being used. TSA checkpoints on highways. Government grabbing small children's genitals. I mean, who could ever believe it? But they did it all on the back of staged terror.
Yeah, I mean, look at the anti-terrorism legislation that was stalled before the Oklahoma City bombing. It sailed through without any dissent after that. And, same thing with the Patriot Act. Any expansion of police state power seemed to follow one of these false flag events.
Wow. Well, before the year 2011 ends, we're going to have you guys back up repeatedly and have Jane Graham and others back on, and some of the others you interviewed right there in studio with you, so people can really have this on record. And folks, we haven't even scratched the surface. When we come back, I want you guys to roll through the evidence of the film and as best you can research who was behind the attacks specifically in the federal government. Stay with us. It's A Noble Lie. It is the only film in the last decade that's been professionally produced looking at Oklahoma City. I've got 35 minutes or so. My 3-hour Road to Tyranny covers it well, but not with all the eyewitnesses and all the clear footage and the deep research they've done living in Oklahoma for many years. In fact, Chris, I'm just going from memory, but haven't you been around for like 10 years investigating this that I've heard of you out there being involved?
Yes, Alex. Thank you. I started in 2000, actually moved here in 2003. There was no way that I could commute back and forth from Fort Worth, and then living in New Mexico for a year logistically was impossible. So I decided to move here, and it was amazing. I was humbled by having the ability to talk to over 325 victims, family members, survivors, law enforcement, everybody that you found out one at a time that they knew there was something horribly wrong with the story. And some of them asked me to keep their names confidential. Others said, that's fine. You can put my name on there. They signed release forms. So
well, break down some of the people that gave you intel that didn't want to be on the record, and then some of the other big bombshells that are on record. I mean, here you got the inventor of the neutron bomb saying it's impossible, the former head of Air Force Weapons Development, the head grand juror saying he was threatened, the mother of the cop they killed who saw what the ATF did, the woman, the head of HUD, seeing the feds planting bombs and thinking they were telephone men. I mean, this is hardcore, and this is a testament. You think you're safe, folks, with people like this running the country? It's a gambit in chess. And militaries do this, where you send in 100 troops, 1,000, to bring out the enemy. You know it's going to wipe out the troops, but they're a sacrifice. And the argument is the end justifies the means. You don't lose 10,000 troops because you're willing to lose 100. That's what they do when governments conduct false flags, and it's very sick. Please continue. Break it down.
Two people in particular, in fact, they're in the film. After about 4 months of researching this case, I had to get grounded. I had to get with somebody in law enforcement or former law enforcement that really knew the nuts and bolts of this case. And that's when I first met Craig Roberts in Tulsa. Drove up there, met with him for the better part of a day, and he laid it all out for me. And and of course, he did an absolutely stellar job of getting the original cache of information together on Terry Akey. He handed me his dossier, a copy of it, and says, "You want to run with this? Go right ahead." And Craig is he's one of the underpinnings. He's an excellent source of information on this. Why? Because he was actually asked by the FBI office in Tulsa to come on and investigate for them. They knew that he had the goods and the resources and basically the inside scoop on people that may or may not have known who actually committed this crime. And then the second person, of course, was Hoppy Heidelberg. So you go from former law enforcement to a gentleman that was actually on the grand jury. And after that, I says, my gosh, we've got to get a clear focus on this. And people like James came forward, and he was able to put the gel to this whole thing together.
Well, what we try to do with this movie is to actually just boil it down to the most provable essence. And no matter if you know everything about the bombing or nothing about the bombing, you're going to walk away with new information. We didn't want to just preach to the choir. We actually wanted to give activists and people that are awake a tool that they can use to wake others up. And so we actually go through the official story at the beginning of the movie and then deconstruct how it is a lie. And I think in the beginning, we're covering the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee's information, their research that has stood, without any, dissent yet. In fact, that came out a few weeks before 9/11. It was meant to get a congressional hearing on the case, and then 9/11 completely overshadowed it. Then we get into the information more recently that researchers like Wendy Painting has been doing, actually going through the defense archives, and then Jesse Trinidad, of course. I mean, you've had him on the show before, Alex, and that guy is just amazing. He's from the hills of Kentucky, and his brother was brutally murdered at the federal transfer facility, and he said, you kill one of my family members, you better kill all of us, because we're not going to stop until we get some justice.
Yeah, he's a lawyer who's keeps suing him, and then they'll black out one document, and he sues him again, they black out the other part, and he gets the full image, and it's the government running the attack. It's just incredible.
Exactly. I mean, he's the one that's uncovered the documents about the SPLC being involved. There was a CIA satellite actually pointed at that white separatist compound the day of the bombing. It took days to coordinate satellite movements back in those days. It's not
what about Camp Grouper and the cops that were flying around privately and saw the truck being loaded with fuel oil? What's that?
Well, we never could get a definitive source on that. We think it's mere coincidence. In fact, the government does rent out Ryder trucks on quite often. They had a contract with the Ryder at the time, so it may have been just a coincidental overlap. But we really
what about the video that Larry Flint and Hustler went with? It was sent to us and then later sent to Hustler, where it looks just like McVeigh a year after he's supposedly out of the military at that demolitions base.
Again, we weren't able to include some of the information in the movie, but I did speak with Bill Bean yesterday, and we are going to put out a YouTube video. We have an extensive interview with him. We have his original footage, and we're going to be getting that out within the next week. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Well, what's your view on that? I mean, clearly Terry Nichols and others have signed affidavits now. This is what the other witnesses said. McVeigh, who was highly decorated, was taken, sheep-dipped, put into security, and told he was basically, like you said, assassinating people, helping run drugs in the country for national security, of course, and getting ready to set up domestic groups. And, of course, they set him up.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you look at the death certificate after McVeigh was supposedly executed, it says his occupation is U.S. Army. I mean, it just gets ridiculous. Anybody can go look that one up.
But I'll tell you what's crazy is it must be like every 10 people or something. I go to family reunions and stuff and have family and people who most of them are like former Army officers, and off record, they were all recruited by the CIA, but then got out for different reasons. And it was usually, I won't deal drugs and kill people in America. So it's the Army is, from my research, is where they get most of the ground level drug dealing murderers. I mean, it's incredible. They must have a giant army of them.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize, McVeigh was actually on the security detail for General Schwarzkopf in the first Persian Gulf War. He was a sharpshooter. He got an award for his service, actually, when he was in custody at the Denver County Jail waiting federal trial. So McVeigh was not a pushover in the Army. He was pretty sharp.
Now, you were talking about the multiple trucks. Now, James Sargent actually retired from an extensive military career and then went fishing at the lake there in Kansas, at Gary State Lake, where McVeigh supposedly was setting the Ryder truck with the ammonium nitrate and fuel. He saw it days before. They saw the Ryder truck there days before the official story says the truck was there. At the same time, they're seeing trucks at, a strip club in Tulsa, Lady Godiva's, and they see the people there with Andreas Strassmeyer and McVeigh, with the Ryder truck outside. So it looks like there were multiple trucks in play here. And Strassmeyer is an interesting character. I mean, like I say, he's really one of the threads that tie this all together. After the bombing, he's whisked out of the country through Mexico, and the FBI says, well, they investigated it. That consisted of them actually making a phone call and saying, were you involved? He said, no. Okay, done. Well, the FBI has mountains and mountains of 302s from their investigation. They never asked any important people the important questions.
Yeah, no, it was all about creating a fake investigation, as Colonel Craig Roberts, he's also Army Lieutenant Colonel, and, of course, before that, Marine in Vietnam, sniper himself, best-selling author, and, of course, one of the main sources for your film. But expanding on that, we have all the different video cameras, and we have FBI agents in the L.A. Times and Washington Times saying, I saw McVeigh with these other men getting in and out, and that they've declared national security on the tapes.
Yeah, exactly. Every single person, every witness that saw McVeigh the day of the bombing, including the ones used for the prosecution, saw McVeigh with other perpetrators that day. Why can't we see the videotapes? I mean, we saw this the same thing with 9/11. They won't show us any of the videotapes of the Pentagon. Well, they won't show us any tapes of the Oklahoma City bombing. It's almost 17 years after. If everybody's been brought to justice, why can't we see them? Jesse Trinidu tries to get access to the tapes. Their story keeps changing. They say, well, we can't find them. It's biggest manhunt in history, biggest investigation in history at that time, and they can't find the tapes. That's ridiculous. Then they leak out some of them, and they all go blank at 9:02 a.m., and they say, well, they were all these different buildings with different security companies all changed their tapes at 9:02 a.m. It just gets ludicrous.
We went back to the service, ADT Security Service. Their building, coincidentally left, was less than 2 blocks from the Murrah building. Went back to the supervisor, and he says, no, there was nothing wrong with those cameras. They had checked them less than 2 weeks before the bombing happened on routine maintenance. They're basically the service reps went to the Murrah building and said, yeah, these cameras are working fine. No worries here. Pay your bill, and we're on our way.
Well, that's like Princess Diana, where all the cameras turn off right as it happens, and then her own letter comes out and the video, but the government seized it, where she said, Prince Charles says he's going to kill me in a fake auto accident, and then we're the conspiracy theorist for not buying the official story of Diana, when she said Charles is going to kill me and how he said he was going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pattern that we see time and time again. They never want to let the tapes out. And, I think the final court decision, there was the CIA came forward and said that it would pose a grave risk to national security if these tapes were to be released. We're supposed to forget that John Doe number 2